veteran cemeteries and help disabled veterans with the rising cost of living. VA's Inspector General recently found that VA spent almost $7 billion on contract disability exams since 2017, even though contractors never met accuracy requirements. The No Bonuses for Bad Exams Act would prevent these contractors from getting bonuses for inaccurate exams and require the VA to expedite the rescheduling of new exams and processing of claims of affected veterans. The Ensuring of Best Schools for Veterans Act will streamline the 85-15 rule for schools, ensuring the VA does not restrict access to legitimate programs of education for student veterans. Also have the National Cemeteries Preservation, Conservation, and Protection Act of 2022 to ensure tribal cemeteries get the resources they need to maintain national standards. That bill also closes a loophole to prevent sexual predators from being buried among our honored heroes, facilitates green burials, and authorizes land transfers to facilitate future expansions of our sacred national cemeteries. Finally, to help with inflation, the Veterans Compensation Cost of Living Adjustment Act authorizes the increase for compensation for our disabled veterans and survivors received from the VA. There are 9 other bills on the agenda covering issues from veteran home loans to vocational rehab and education. So I want to thank the witnesses here for being here at this committee here today and taking the time to discuss how we're going to improve services to our veterans. And now it is indeed my pleasure to turn over to a much more competent ranking member, Senator Blackburn.
Let's not tell Senator Moran you said that.
You got to do it. I hate to waste comments.
There you go. I want to welcome our witnesses that are here today. We know that we have a little bit of a time crunch, and you all have been patient, and we are grateful for that. As Chairman Tester said, we have 13 different bills that we're going to discuss today, and these do affect the VBA, and they do affect those disability, education benefits, survivor benefits, the burial benefits, and one of our concerns deals with workload, the current workload, being able to meet the needs of the veterans, and we're going to look at how these bills would affect the workload and thereby have an impact on the veterans, their dependents, and the survivors. I will have a fuller statement for the record, but in the interest of time, Mr. Chairman, let's move forward.
Thank you, Senator. I want to welcome our panel of VA witnesses to the hearing today. We have Beth Murphy, who is Executive Director of Compensation Service at Veterans Benefits Administration. Thanks for being here, Beth. Beth is accompanied by Jocelyn Moses, Senior Principal Advisor at the Compensation Service, and James Ruhlman, Deputy Director for Program Management at Education Service. Ms. Murphy will provide the statement for the VA, and you are recognized for 5 minutes, and please know that your entire statement will be a part of the record.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Blackburn, and members of the committee. Thank you for the introduction and the invitation to discuss VA's views on pending legislation. VA offers support for much of the proposed legislation before us today. We have provided detailed comments in the full testimony to include areas of support and areas of concern, including availability of appropriations in some instances. We have also highlighted certain provisions that could be clarified or amended in the text of the bills. I will briefly highlight key points on these bills. First, VA supports S4223, the Veterans Compensation Cost of Living Adjustment Act, as well as S4308, the Veterans Marriage Recognition Act of 2022, which would codify VA's existing practice of administering spousal benefits to same-sex married couples. VA does suggest Congress consider amendments to address limitations in existing law regarding marriages outside of the U.S. VA generally supports S3606 to provide service members more flexibility to decide the time frame for a dependent to use transferred entitlement of education benefits, and also supports the draft bill on VA's education program, except for concerns with mandating the level of decision authority for determinations. Largely consistent with current VA procedures, S3548 would provide a presumption of service connection for hearing loss and tinnitus for certain veterans and to establish a minimum disability rating for veterans who require a hearing aid because of service-connected disability. VA supports this bill subject to availability of appropriations and citing some concerns with the language. VA appreciates the aim of S4208 to improve veterans' access to home loans by requiring VA to clarify existing requirements in the appraisal process and consider new opportunities for improvements. VA supports this bill if amended. Regarding the draft bill to make improvements to the Native American Direct Loan Program, VA has demonstrated commitment to ongoing improvements for this program and would support the bill if amended as outlined in the full testimony. Moving to S3994, this bill would provide an order of preference and some limitations for VA's reissuance of funds misused by a fiduciary if the beneficiary is deceased. VA supports this bill in principle since the hierarchy is based on current procedures VA follows, and we would offer further technical assistance for potential amendments. Regarding the draft bill for veterans' cemeteries on trust land, VA generally supports the bill overall, but for Section 1, where we would request amendments. Regarding the advisory committee under S4141 and the promotion of Chapter 31 programs under S4319, VA does not support these bills, primarily on the basis that VA believes existing processes or structures with some modifications could satisfy the intents of the bills. The full testimony does reflect VA's views and multiple comments, and we would offer additional technical assistance. And please know we are actively working to clear the views letter on the no bonuses for bad exams bill, which we anticipate providing before the August recess. Lastly, VA agrees with the purpose of S3372 to strengthen benefits for children of Vietnam veterans born with spina bifida or other covered birth defects. While we believe much of the legislation can be accomplished with VA's existing authorities, we have highlighted recommended changes and that we believe will enhance the bill. In closing, thank you again for the opportunity to discuss this important legislation to improve benefits and services for veterans, service members, and their families. And my colleagues and I are prepared to answer your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Murphy, and appreciate you all being here. The VA's Office of Inspector General recent report on contract disability exams is another example of a program that I believe is troubled. In the OIG report dating back to 2008, the GAO report several reoccurring issues have been flagged that need to be addressed with these exams. The most recent IG report found that the contractors could be inaccurate 1 out of every 3 exams. How can VA know veterans are getting accurate ratings if there's a potential 1 out of 3 being bad?
So, Senator, I will say that the examination is certainly a key piece of evidence in many of the claims that we process.
It's very important, and it's an area where we continue to do a lot of work and continue on improvements. Regarding this bill, we're just not prepared to speak to it today ahead of the views letter that should be coming before the August recess.
Okay, but what about the fact that, assuming the IG report is correct, assuming that they could be inaccurate on 1 out of 3 exams, how do you know that the VA is getting, the veterans are getting accurate ratings?
Senator, I can tell you that we have multiple layers of quality review processes within VA at the local level, at the national level, both on the exam piece themselves and on the overall rating that's completed in the claim, just to make sure that the proper decision and the outcome for the veteran is accomplished.
And how often are you guys finding that the exams are inaccurate?
Sir, I don't have information on that with me today. We could take that back.
And what's the solution if you do find an inaccurate exam?
In cases where we have an inadequate or incomplete exam, there is a process to return that to the provider to add additional information to cure that exam, so to speak, and make sure that it's usable for VA rating purposes.
Okay, does that add additional time as far as the claim process goes for the veteran?
I would say a short amount of time, but that's a quick turnaround in most cases.
Okay, we've heard from schools in Montana and around the country that recent changes in VA implementation of the 8515 rule have caused some confusion for schools and for veterans. In fact, in Montana, 5 schools have had programs suspended over the last year due to the 8515 rule, including our 2 major universities, Montana State and the University of Montana. The bill on today's agenda that I happen to be sponsoring will clarify the 8515 requirement and make it easier for student veterans to enroll in legitimate education programs. So this is for you, Mr. Rollman. Why did the VA choose to reset the 8515 rule and rescind 35% exemptions for schools nationwide?
Thank you for that question, Senator. VA's primary purpose in putting out the new guidance and the reset was to reset the 35% exemption. There were a number of schools that did have 35% exemptions, and we had not verified and double-checked that information in quite a while. We also put out additional guidance to make sure that schools were familiar with the 8515 requirements and making sure that they were reporting that correctly. We did provide additional training as well as new forms that were available for that reporting. But the biggest part of the reset was the 35% exemption.
Have you had the opportunity to look at the bill that I'm talking about, the Ensuring the Best Schools for Vets Act?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and assuming it passes, would the VA have the capacity to implement the provisions quickly so that student veterans wouldn't be turned away from programs this fall, assuming it passes?
Yes, we would.
Okay.
The streamlining measures are very clear, and it clarifies the effect of the 35% exemption, as well as exempting those programs with less than 10 supported students. We feel comfortable that we could implement that within the 90 days after the date of signature by the president, and we could implement that within that time frame. We do have concerns, however, with the review process that is mandated, because there would still be potentially hundreds of reports of 8515 computations, and consequently there could be some number of suspensions as well, and requiring reviews at the USB and then the secretary level could add a severe administrative burden depending upon how many programs were still in violation.
Okay, thank you. Ranking Member Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Murphy, I want to talk about workforce. This is something that the Secretary and I have talked about, and about the length of time that it takes to process a claim. Now, VBA, you're taking about 100 days to process a claim, correct?
Senator Blackburn, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but yes, we always aim to complete a case under 125 days, which keeps it out of the backlog.
Okay, so how many cases are in that 125-day window that have not made it onto the backlog, which I understand now is 176,884? So you've got 176,000 cases.
Ma'am, I don't have those numbers with me today.
Okay,
We can
why
get that
don't you
for
do this? Why don't you get all of that information on the number of days and the number of claims that are in that 125-day window, so that we have a better feel for where you all are with addressing the backlog. I do think it is a good thing that you are in a pilot project trying to speed up the claims processing. We are hopeful that that automated benefit delivery is going to bring some relief to our veterans. So we're watching that very, very closely. Let me ask you this. How much of the claims process can be automated to increase your ability to process these in a more efficient manner?
Senator, I would say that we are going slow to eventually go fast. So we're doing it in a smart way. We're looking first at some of the provisions that would potentially be and conditions that would be involved in the honoring our pact legislation, so that we can, target some of those areas where we expect, a number of claims coming in, going with that volume. Even pieces of the claims process, doesn't have to be end to end, but pieces of the process, it all adds up. And those incremental efficiencies help to keep the workload flowing and benefits going to veterans.
Okay, what percentage or what number of your claims processors are working in person? And how many are still working remote?
Senator Blackburn, we have been working through return to the workplace. I wouldn't say return to work because folks have been working full-time at home. Returning to the workplace, working through that with our labor partners in the regional offices across the country. I can tell you in headquarters, my staff has been back since about May timeframe. In the regional offices, coming back incrementally, and I think some of the big volume now.
So has productivity decreased or increased?
Overall, I will tell you that when we first went home because of the national emergency, our productivity really increased. I mean, when we had the work available, when we were able to do the exams in person and things like that, it's just the supply chain of the evidence getting to us was slowing us down.
When we talk about productivity, have you hired more claims processors and are you more productive because of that? Or is it because individuals are actually completing some of these claims?
Ma'am, I would say it's multifaceted. Yes, we have hired and trained additional.
Let me ask you one more thing then. I want to talk about this Hearing Benefits Act. I think that I am very hesitant to vote for things that make false promises. And I've been very concerned about the PACT Act and the implementation of that because the VA has said they cannot implement this. So when you look at this benefit, which would provide a presumption of service connection, and it is something that is not time limited, I have serious concerns about that, and I would like to get your take very quickly on that bill and what we should do to fix that so that we're certain that it is service-related.
Indeed, and those concerns would be shared by VA, that without the time-limited piece, we could be overlooking other intervening factors, science, medicine, NASA, the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report from 2006, which was not making that connection in all cases. It's an individualized person-by-person situation. I will say, though, that we already do have some amount of presumption of service connection for hearing loss, particularly in that 1-year window following service, discharge from service. And we also instruct our claims processors to really lean in to acknowledge acoustic trauma in combat situations and also in certain military occupation specialties, which we have listed. So we are leaning in now. Hearing loss and tinnitus are we're in the top three, two of the top three most prevalent service-connected disabilities. So we already are paying a number of folks for those conditions.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this hearing. I'd like to thank all of you for being here with us today. My questions will be on the Native American Direct Loan Program, which does not have a number yet, but is in draft form. And I received and I appreciate the input from the VA, and I can assure you I recognize and I most certainly appreciate Senator Blackburn's comments about making promises that we don't keep. and I don't want this to happen again. In 1992, Congress required the VA to establish the Native American Direct Loan Program to increase home ownership for Native American veterans living on reservations, since trust lands are subject to legal restrictions that can make traditional mortgage lending difficult and prevent Native American veterans from using the home loan benefit that they've earned through their service. Despite the availability of these loans, various Native American advocacy groups have identified the the Native American Direct Loan, the NADL, as an underperforming program that has a long, complex application process and makes very few loans to qualified borrowers. Just as an example, between fiscal years 2012 and 2021, the NADL originated, and this is not a mistake, just 89 loans to veterans in the contiguous United States and only 91 loans in Hawaii and none in Alaska, indicating that the VA made loans to less than 1% of the estimated 64 to 70,000 eligible veterans in these reservation areas. Now, I've been working on this issue with my constituents in South Dakota for years, and I've had meetings, listening sessions, and site visits with veterans, Native community development and financial institutions, and other Native homeownership providers. Now, in coordination with Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Moran, and other members of the committee, I asked the GAO to review the NADL program in 2020 and identify areas of improvement. What we've learned, and what the GAO confirmed in its recent analysis of the NADL loan program, is that the program has not met its full potential to improve homeownership opportunities for very deserving and qualified Native American veterans. We're not living up to our promises. In fact, one of my constituents died before his NADL loan was closed after working with the VA for over 7 years. We have to do better. For this reason, in partnership with Chairman Tester, I've introduced the Native American Direct Loan Improvement Act to make the NADL program more accessible and increase home ownership opportunities for Native American veterans as the program was originally intended. I really do see meaningful opportunity to work together to make bipartisan, meaningful reforms to this loan program, and I look forward to working with you. Now, I've received your comments, and I know that you have suggested in the comments that you think rather than doing a pilot program, we should move directly into a program of record, basically. But you've also suggested that rather than providing grants to local third parties that do this on the reservations right now, that we do a partnership program. My question for you is, you've had the opportunity to do those partnerships in the Midwest, and you've not done that. You have done some in the Pacific region, but you've done none at this point. What would change that would require you to participate and actually make the program move forward unless we separate this out as a direct a grant program?
So thank you for your review of the bill, Senator. And we share your energy in this space, that this is a population and a type of benefit that we really want to embrace even more in VA. We've started to demonstrate that. Just a couple quick comments about things we have done. Recently hired a dedicated team of 7 employees. Before, this was kind of an other duties as assigned among many folks. They are focusing already on strategic virtual events, outreach, in-person events. They have a dedicated phone number and an email address. They, as a dedicated team, they're also able to start building those relationships
With the third-party entities?
across the board in this space, sir. Yes.
It appears to me that you would be supportive of this approach with some modifications.
Yes,
One
sir.
was suggesting perhaps doing it as a permanent program rather than a pilot project, which I have no objections to. The other one would be I'd really want clear evidence in a partnership that it would proceed. And if we could have that assurance, we would most certainly consider that. The only other thing that I would what would be concerned with is the amount of paperwork, which right now has really caused a lot of these systems to not work. And that is that there is in particular, there is a required OMB form, such as the VA form 26-1852 for description of materials, which places an unfair burden and an unnecessary cost on Native American veterans applying to build or to renovate a home. And it sounds like these forms may be a real significant barrier to NADL's success in Indian country. Would it be feasible to either remove or to streamline this paperwork requirement, or at the very least dedicate more of this staff that you're talking about right now to handle the construction underwriting to assist with completing these rather complicated forms for these veterans?
Senator, I think there's a lot of opportunity here to work together with your staff on this bill and to help the veterans that are affected and could take better advantage of the natal program. We're committed to doing that and to working with you on this bill.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for your work and for being here. As you know, veterans of all backgrounds, races, genders, and sexualities have given their lives in service to our country, and we're forever indebted to them. Unfortunately, in the past, VA denied survivor benefits to same-sex surviving spouses and left them without the support that they deserve. VA has rightfully fixed its regulations to honor the service of all of our veterans, and current regulations extend survivor benefits to all surviving spouses, including those within same-sex couples. In May, I joined Senator Peters and a bipartisan group of my colleagues in introducing the Veterans Marriage Recognition Act to codify those regulations and ensure that no future administration can roll back benefits for surviving military spouses due to sexual orientation. I understand earlier in the hearing that you indicated the VA's support for the legislation. Can you speak to what the VA is already doing here and how this legislation would help?
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask my colleague, Ms. Moses, to speak to that.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. So as you've already indicated, the bill does provide clear statutory basis for the practices that VA has already adopted. So following the court cases of Oberfell and Windsor, we have taken action to ensure that same-sex marriages are both counted and identified as we're providing disability compensation or additional benefits for those veterans. I think one thing that is important to note is that this, as written, the bill does not apply to the laws of foreign nations, specifically those that prohibit or don't recognize those same-sex marriages. And so I think as we're working together, that would be the only additional comment or concern that we would have, just to make sure that the entire veteran population is taken care of, regardless of where they reside.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and thank you for your work on this. And thanks, Mr. Chair. That's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, both panels. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to first thank my committee colleagues, Senator Blackburn, Blumenthal, and Bolden, for co-sponsoring my bill 3606, which streamlines the information a service member or veteran must include when transferring a GI Bill benefits to a dependent. This simple fix will reduce any unnecessary confusion and prevent situations where a service member or veteran passes away and the dependent is then unable to complete the benefit transfer for their educational opportunity. It should never be the case that a veteran or a family member is unable to access a VA benefit for which they are entitled due to a clerical error. Second, I'd like to bring up S3994 bill to reinstate defrauded funds to a veteran's estate if the veteran passes away before the VA has concluded its investigation. I thank my colleague, Senator Manchin, for introducing this bill with me. This bill, along with 3606, while affecting a small minority of veterans, will create a lasting permanent impact on veterans and their families, and I'm grateful to my colleagues for supporting this effort, and I also thank you for supporting it as well. So just a couple of questions here. Ms. Murphy, in case of a veteran who has been defrauded of compensation by a fiduciary representative, is there more that can be done to screen or conduct a periodic assessment on the named fiduciary representatives to prevent any issues of fraud? Anything else?
Senator, I don't have anything in mind right now, but our teams would be happy to work with your staff.
How often does the VA conclude a fiduciary in mishandling a veteran's financial compensation?
I don't have those numbers with me today, but we can take that back.
Can you?
I-
Can't guess at it? Okay.
I would be out of my league to do so,
Okay,
sir.
thank you. In your testimony, the VA requests tweaks to the language
Yes.
of S3994 to rather than preclude a fiduciary who has misused benefits from receiving payment of reissued funds, instead have the funds offset by the amount misissued. The VA also requests changes to the language to allow an executor to receive and hold funds until the inheritor has been identified. Can you please talk a little bit more in depth about these concerns?
Certainly, Senator. I think as far as the misuse, we recognize the need to not encourage this behavior or reward it in any way, but also to recognize the precedential estate standards that exist. So if somebody is inheriting money from somebody, that's important, but also important to make sure that the misuse is taken care of. So offsetting, making sure that we recoup that money rather than say you're not getting anything at all. So I just think reconciling that language.
You know, does the VA need statutory authority to do what this bill requires, or can it be done, through policy?
I think there's some room to do it within existing authority, but I think it would be best handled for additional technical assistance to make sure we don't miss anything.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next up, we've got Senator Blumenthal via WebEx.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Senator Tester and the ranking member for having this hearing. And thank you, Ms. Murphy, and your colleagues for being here. I want to begin by asking a couple of questions about the bill that was the topic for Senator Blackburn, the Veterans Hearing Benefit Act, S3548. Let me be clear, what is the VA's position on this bill? Because I think it's so important to provide as much hearing benefits as possible. Although often ignored, the ability to hear is critical to so many other physical and emotional aspects of life. The sense of physical balance that prevents falls, the sense of connection to the world that prevents depression and anxiety. And so whatever the condition that prevents adequate hearing, I think the VA should address it and presume that it is service connected if there's any possibility that it results from combat injury, invisible wounds as well as visible ones. So perhaps, Ms. Murphy, you can tell me what the VA's position is on this bill.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. We do support this. It is much of it is in line with existing policies and procedures that we're already following. As I mentioned earlier, hearing loss and tinnitus are in the top three. They're number one and number three of the service-connecting conditions among all of our veterans. I think it's a demonstration that within the authorities that we have definitely leaned in to utilize that the presumption that is on part of 38 CFR 3.309A, right after, within that 1 year window after discharge from service, and also to recognize the acoustic trauma, even in combat with certain military occupations, and in particular with combat, even if we don't have that link to service in the service records, the lay statement or veteran statement is enough for us to be able to concede that acoustic trauma occurred in service. So it allows us to move the claim forward and evaluate the degree of disability.
And what can the VA do to expand access to hearing care among all veterans?
As far as VHA, they do have some authorities based on the priority groups and the level of service connection. I know a number of veterans do take advantage of getting hearing aids through VA when they have service-connected disabilities. So I think just continued discussion, more technical assistance if we can provide it. But I just want to reemphasize that we do embrace this and agree with you, sir, that hearing impairment is critical and does affect employability.
And I would like to suggest or request that perhaps if you or someone from VHA could report back to us about legislative steps, additional legislative steps that perhaps we can take, or administrative steps that the VA can take to expand access to care for hearing impairment. If you could give us a report on that issue, I would really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator.
Let me also touch on S4319, the Veterans Readiness and Employment Act. Actually, the VETS Act, which promotes information about the Veterans Readiness and Employment Act. The bill that I've co-sponsored with Senator Cassidy is known as the Veterans on Education for Transition Servicemen's Act. Its acronym is VETS Act, but promoting education about the provisions of that measure, because apparently so few veterans are aware of the programs that may be available. Do you agree that more education, more outreach are desirable?
Senator, I would ask my colleague, Ms. Moses, to speak to that. I think that we do agree that there's always more that can be done. We certainly embrace outreach and education in this space, but I'll ask Ms. Moses to elaborate.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy, and thank you, Senator. So VA does agree with the bill's intent to ensure, and as a matter of fact, the department has an objective to ensure that veterans are fully informed of their benefits. And so we're definitely on the same page in making sure that we're informing and educating our veterans. One of the reasons why we are not supportive of this bill in particular is because we feel that there's much redundancy here. So for example, when it comes specifically to Chapter 31 and Chapter 33 and the comparison and ensuring that our veterans and service members know the differences between the benefits that are available to them, we have notification within the disability compensation notice letter. Also, when veterans apply and are deemed eligible for VRNE services, they have an initial evaluation with a counselor where they can receive one-on-one guidance. Additionally, we have an existing online presence, which does a side-by-side comparison tool. That website is also 508 compliant, and it provides those veterans and potential those service members who are potentially veterans with information of what kind of services they can get. For that transitioning service member who has not yet come out of the service, there's information that is provided within our Transition Assistance Program, or TAP. And they also have the opportunity to meet one-on-one with a benefits advisor. And the key here is making sure that veterans are getting the information that is particular or specific to them for their scenario. And then finally, for those individuals who are discharging through the medical separation process, through IDAS, they too have the opportunity to meet with a counselor to have one-on-one advice provided to them.
Thank you for your response, Ms. Moses. My time has expired, so I'm not in a position to go back with a response to you, but I'd like my staff to work with you. I think there may be less redundancy than perhaps is indicated, but one way or the other, if we can move forward without redundancy, so much the better. Mr. Chairman, I thank you and the staff for accommodating my absence through this WebEx connection. I really do appreciate it, both you and the staff. And if I'm not a co-sponsor of 3548, I ask to be added without objection.
Without objection, so ordered, and we always appreciate your input, Senator Blumenthal. It adds a lot to this committee. As we set up for the second panel, I just want to thank all three of you for being here. I want to thank all three of you for the work that you do every day. we can do the best work in the world. If it's not implemented in the best way, it doesn't do what we want it to do. And so thank all three of you for your great work that you do for the veterans of this nation. And with that, you can be excused, and we'll get the second panel up. Thank you. The second panel consists of Christina Keenan, who is Associate Director of National Legislative Service at the Veterans of Foreign Wars. It consists of Michael McLaughlin, who is Legislative Chairman of the National Association of County Veterans Service Officers. And it consists of Ann Meehan, who is Assistant Vice President of Government Relations from the American Council on Education. I want to welcome all three of you here today. We appreciate your perspectives on these bills. And Ms. Keenan, we will start with you. You may proceed.
Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Moran, and members of the committee, on behalf of the men and women of the Veterans of Foreign Wars and its auxiliary, thank you for the opportunity to provide our remarks on legislation pending before this committee. The VFW's views on all 13 bills can be found in my written testimony. I will take the opportunity to highlight a few of them. The VFW supports the No Bonuses for Bad Exams Act, which aims to resolve issues identified in a June 2022 VA OIG report. The OIG found deficiencies in VA's governance and oversight of its contract medical exam program, specifically that VA did not hold vendors accountable for correcting exams, nor did vendors meet the 92% exam accuracy requirement. This is very concerning for the VFW and the veterans that we represent, primarily because exams were not corrected prior to final rating decisions. The VFW appreciates that this legislation would establish transparent annual training requirements. It would create incentives for vendors to reach or exceed a 95% exam accuracy rate. It would require monthly reporting on exam quality and would provide priority processing of claims when exams are found to have errors. Also, something to note, since VA eliminated the 48-hour review, VSOs have lost the ability to intervene when errors in claims are discovered. The VFW recommends restoring a pre-decisional review period so that VSOs can assist in catching errors before final rating decisions are made, reducing the need for veterans to appeal. The VFW supports S 4458, the Ensuring the Best Schools for Veterans Act of 2022, to improve the process by which the VA determines whether an educational institution meets certain requirements for enrollment. VA's 8515 rule was not meant to prohibit veterans from using their education benefits. However, due to recent changes that had unintended consequences, certain schools were unsure if they could enroll veterans in courses. This proposal takes input from schools and veteran advocates to make sure veterans can use the benefits they've earned while schools can maintain quality standards. The VFW supports S 4319, the Informing Vets Act of 2022, to better inform veterans about the opportunities offered through the Veteran Readiness and Employment, or VRE program. The Bureau of Labor Statistics found the unemployment rate for veterans in June of this year was 2.7%. And while this is good news, the VFW understands that this situation can be cyclical. If we do not put proper tools in place, we could see these numbers rise again in the future. VRE offers a proven system that enables veterans to train for their next career, allowing them to thrive and prosper in their communities. The VFW supports S 3548, the Veterans Hearing Benefits Act of 2022, which would require VA to recognize tinnitus and hearing loss as presumptive conditions for service in combat or in military occupational specialties with exposure to acoustic trauma. Service in the military is often accompanied by activities during training, deployments, and everyday operations that can put service members' hearing at risk. The VA also acknowledges that hearing problems, including tinnitus, are the most prevalent service-connected disabilities among veterans. VFW members feel strongly about this, and through a VFW resolution, urge Congress to pass this legislation. And lastly, the VFW supports S4308, the Veterans Marriage Recognition Act of 2022, which would update the definition of surviving spouse within Title 38 U.S.C. to include same-sex marriages. The VFW also recommends an update within the same section of law, striking the language that a surviving spouse may not live with another person or hold themselves out to be married. This is outdated language and should be removed to reflect the marriage requirements of the current era. Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Moran, thank you for the opportunity to provide my remarks. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Ms. Keenan, appreciate your remarks, and there will be questions. You're up next, Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Moran, and members of this committee. My name is Michael McLaughlin, and I serve as a County Veteran Service Officer in Blue Earth County, Minnesota. And I am the Legislative Chairman for the National Association of County Veteran Service Officers, or NACVSO. It is my honor to testify before this committee about pending legislation, and in particular the draft bill known as No Bonuses for Bad Exams. For those who are unfamiliar, NACVSO has over 1,700 veteran service officer members and represents the interest of over 5,000 county, city, tribal, and state governmental employees who work tirelessly to ensure veterans in their local communities receive the benefits they have earned. State and local county employed veteran service officers account for over 2/3 of all veteran service officers accredited by VA and often are the first point of contact veterans have with VA. We assist veterans by guiding them through the long and sometimes stressful benefits process. Through our work, we understand veterans' needs and the daily challenges they encounter. Our policy platform is largely based on these experiences. I hope my testimony will give the committee a frontline perspective so that the pending legislation you are considering today can move forward. NACVSO fully supports the No Bonuses for Bad Exams legislation. CVSOs work hard with our VSO partners to catch some of the issues that stem from unnecessary or inadequate exams performed by examiners who are not up to date on the latest standards. But in many cases, these issues are not identified until an initial claim is denied, and a supplemental or a higher level review must be submitted. In one example identified by one of our members, a veteran's disability claim was denied based on an inadequate exam performed by an experienced contracted examiner. A higher level review was submitted for the denied claim, and a VA Decision Review Officer, or DRO, found multiple errors and that this exam was so inadequate, the DRO felt it necessary to define what an adequate medical opinion was in their instructions back to the examiner. NACVSO is grateful for the efforts that this individual DRO took to educate the examiner, but this sort of education should happen before any examiner performs an exam. This is just one example, but if a seasoned examiner like this can be so far from the standard, we know that this is more commonplace than we would hope. NACVSO has also long advocated for improving transparency of medical disability examinations. Requiring the VA to provide the examiner's credentials to the veteran and their representative as part of this proposed legislation is a step towards that greater transparency. In many instances, the veteran is under the incorrect impression that the assigned examiner is a specialist in a relevant medical field. For example, a veteran may think their heart condition will be examined by a cardiologist, but in all actuality, they may receive their examination from a general practitioner. Knowing this information in advance prepares the veteran to articulate their symptoms in specific detail to document their full health picture. Additionally, NACVSO fully supports the requirement to remove inadequate or unnecessary examinations from a veteran's VA file. Our CVSOs have seen instances where the inadequate exams are cited by future examiners and the bad exams are not purged from the file. I am here today because NACVSO sees this legislation as a good start towards addressing some of the shortcomings of the disability examination process. We encourage VA to consider implementing a policy that gives veterans greater flexibility when scheduling their contracted exams, because currently the VA gives a veteran no expectation about when a contracted company will reach out to schedule that exam. When that crucial call finally comes, the veteran is offered only a short window in which they can schedule their exam. One recent example of this case is when a young National Guard soldier returning home from a deployment to a full-time job and his family submitted a claim and was contacted by a VA contracted company to set up his exams, but with only an 8-day window to do so. However, this veteran was leaving the next day on a family vacation. The veteran provided the dates he would be available, but was told by this contractor that he would have to contact the VA. That very same day, the veteran's entire exam scheduling request was canceled, and the veteran was deemed unavailable by the contractor. A month later, the veteran received a letter from VA stating that he had expressed desire to withdraw his claim. What should have been a simple accommodation for the scheduling conflicts has now turned into a lengthy and unnecessary clarification process for the veteran. Chairman Tester, Ranking Member Moran, and members of the committee, NACVSO and its members deeply appreciate the important work you are doing to ensure America's veterans receive the respect and benefits they have earned. And working together with VA and all of its stakeholders, we can make this process better. Thank you.
Once again, I want to say thank you for your testimony, and I look forward to my questions. Ms. Meehan, you're up.
Chairman Tester and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to speak at this hearing. My name is Ann Meehan, and I am the Assistant Vice President of Government Relations at the American Council on Education. ACE represents approximately 1,800 public and private 2-year and 4-year colleges and universities. I've been asked to speak about S4458, the Ensuring the Best Schools for Veterans Act of 2022. This bill would clarify the 35% exemption to the 85-15 rule and restore it to its original intent. In so doing, it will also ensure that veterans can continue to enroll in the quality programs of their choosing. We strongly support this bipartisan legislation and thank Chairman Tester and Ranking Member Moran for its introduction. The 85-15 rule provides important safeguards for veterans and their GI Bill benefits against waste, fraud, and abuse. At its core, the law seeks to ensure that at least 15% of students in any education program are not using GI Bill benefits to pay for the program. The rationale for this rule was that the enrollment of at least some non-veteran students provided important evidence of program value and quality because the non-veterans were willing to pay out of their own pockets to attend. While in general, the rule requires institutions to report 85-15 ratios for each of their programs, the statute also includes an important exception. Institutions with a low percentage of enrolled veterans, less than 35%, are exempt from providing these ratios. As the legislative history makes clear, requiring 85-15 ratios from institutions with a low percentage of enrolled veterans would, quote, result in burdensome and costly record-keeping requirements with little tangible demonstration that accountability had been ensured or abuse has been curbed, unquote. Unfortunately, as part of the 85-15 policy reset, the VA has required institutions to reapply for their 35% exemption and to submit 85-15 ratios for every program, which is contrary to the letter of the law and its legislative history. This interpretation has placed institutions in a catch-22, unable to receive the exemption without first completing the ratios. As a result, campuses spent multiple days computing 85-15 ratios for hundreds of programs, most of which did not have any veterans enrolled. Compounding these challenges as a result of VA's changes to the definition of a supported student, campuses also found that they had many programs that now exceeded 85-15, even though there was not a single veteran enrolled in the program. At almost all public and nonprofit institutions, the total veteran enrollment is below 35%, and at most it is in the low single digits. But because of VA's changes, a growing number of campuses have been informed that their programs are no longer eligible for GI Bill benefits. This includes programs popular with veterans, such as programs in computer science, cybersecurity, healthcare, nursing, and business administration, to name a few. By clarifying the 35% exemption, S4458 would undo the negative impacts of this policy change on institutions with low total veterans and the veterans they serve. It will also ensure that veterans who attend these institutions can enroll in the program of their choice. Because registration for the fall term typically begins in August, we hope S4458 will be passed quickly by Congress to help minimize disruptions for veterans this fall. Without this critical fix, institutions will be forced to deny veterans from enrolling in certain programs or may have to turn them away entirely. We thank Chairman Tester and Ranking Member Moran for crafting legislation that addresses these unintended consequences and restores the original intent of the law. The legislation has our full support, and we look forward to working with you to help ensure a swift passage. I would be pleased to answer any questions.
And thank you for your testimony. We appreciate all three of you. I just want to tell you that the fact that everybody isn't here is for a number of reasons, and it's not because you're not important. Let's just put it that way. It's because there's a lot of stuff going on right now. I'm going to start with you, Mr. McLaughlin, and that is that you've got to educate me a little bit. When we're talking about exams, I'm assuming they don't all go to contracted folks, that there's some done by VA employees, but could you tell me if they're all contracted?
There is still a small amount that are done by VA employees. What we see and our members see is that tends to be more audiology along those lines, tinnitus and hearing, but most of the general exams we're seeing are being done by contracted examiners.
Okay, and you saw the statistics that I said, potentially 1 out of 3. I would assume that may be a worst case scenario, but maybe it isn't. What do you think?
As far as the full volume of those contracted claims of being 1 out of 3, it's hard for me to speak to that. But what I can say, the claims that we are seeing go to a higher level review or a supplemental review, a higher portion of those, and the most common reason for those getting sent back to be reworked is because of a duty to assist or exam issues that are found.
You talked about a seasoned, experienced examiner that you dealt with. What's your definition of seasoned?
Several hundred exams.
Okay. Last question is even though it's a very small percentage that VA employees are doing of these exams, are you seeing the same kind of problems with VA exams as you are with the contracted ones? Or are they too few to even make that analysis?
I would say what we hear from our CVSOs out in the field is that more often on the hearing claims, we are seeing less of these issues, but also that's usually less of a technical claim and exam that you're looking at too in a lot of those scenarios. So it's kind of a unfair comparison, I would say.
Apples and oranges. Ms. Keenan, I asked this question of the previous panel, but with bad exams, is it resulting, and are you hearing from your membership, the VFW membership, that this is resulting in claims being extended out and not getting the timely benefits they need?
Thank you for the question. Yes, and the VFW has advocated for priority processing for these claims because veterans should not have to experience delays in their claims because of a VA or contract exam error.
That is a fact. Are you, from your membership, is this a high priority item, Ms. Keenan?
This is a high priority item. It's very concerning, the data from the OIG report. We have requested from VA data on their exam quality, which we have not received. So this bill would help provide some additional oversight to the quality of the exams, and to provide that monthly reporting would be extremely helpful.
Okay, Ms. Meehan, on the 8515 bill, you had said that if this bill doesn't pass and if it doesn't get implemented appropriately before the beginning of the school year, that it could have some real negative effects on veterans that want to go to school. I'm always looking for numbers. What kind of numbers are we talking about? A third, a half, all that could be kept from furthering their education if we don't do something on this ASAP?
One data point I have is that a recent survey, at least 20% of the institutions had already heard back from VA that they had at least some programs that were denied. I have heard of one institution where virtually every program on the campus had exceeded the ratios. So it's going to be a range. One other challenge to getting you that number is that right now the VA is still processing 35% exemptions. So until they come through, we won't know for sure whether which programs will be denied.
In Ms. Murphy's testimony, if my notes are correct, she said that in the case of this bill, you can shake your head no if I didn't read this right, by the way, that in the case of this bill, that the VA had the capacity to fix this without legislation. Do you see it the same way?
I would hope so. I will tell you, they do have the 35% number. They know the percentage of veterans because every school that submitted their application would have given them the total number of veterans on campus out of their population. So that data should already be in their hands.
Okay. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the witnesses here. Ms. Keenan, I want to just make a quick statement. You can just take it back to your leadership. I'm a proud member of the VFW myself. Worked hard with this committee on the PACT Act, was voting on some procedural things to make it stronger. VFW official went up to my state's VFW convention, clueless, and talked to my veterans about how I wasn't being supportive of a priority. Really pissed me off, okay? So send that back to the VFW. Whoever that guy was, talking to my veterans, I probably do more to support veterans, care about veterans, am a veteran, am a member of the VFW. So I just don't appreciate people going up to Alaska not knowing what they're talking about from your organization. Let them know that. Let them know that. Anyways, my legislation on the home loan issues, improving access to the VA Home Loan Act of 2022, as you know, the home loan is one of the most important and useful of all military benefits. It ensures our military members are able to afford housing, regardless of their ability to save up for a down payment, and it's a well-earned benefit. And one of the big issues that you see, particularly in rural states like Alaska or Montana, is that the appraisal process often takes much longer in rural communities because the VA does not have enough VA appraisal officials. So what my bill does is it focuses on making sure that veterans in rural areas and the VA have the ability to do those appraisals in a much more timely way like they would in more urban or suburban areas. The average wait time for a VA appraisal nationally is 10 days. In Alaska, it's over 30 days, and you can lose out on getting a house during that time. So, Ms. Keenan, I appreciate the VFW's support for S4208, which is my bill improving access to the VA Home Loan Act. It's meant to address this challenge. It's also meant to address some of the housing shortages that you see in rural states like Alaska. I just want to thank you for the support. I want to see if there are other panelists, Mr. McLaughlin, you as well, have views on this, and in particular, our rural members of the VFW or your other organizations. Are you hearing from rural members who also have had difficulties with these appraisal issues that are impacting their ability to actually get VA home loans?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, we've heard feedback that the appraisals can take longer, and sometimes the VA-approved appraisers are not as well informed about the housing costs and comparing rates within certain rural areas. So this would take a look at that process and even potentially add desktop appraisers to try to facilitate additional options for veterans in rural areas, which we support.
So just to be clear, and I know you've already stated, but I want you to state it here in the hearing, the VA has some issues with the bill. We're still trying to get their support, but the VFW does support S4208, correct?
Correct.
Mr. McLaughlin, you have any views on that?
Yeah, I would say we do see veterans in rural settings have issues with getting homes through the VA home loan process. When things were in a seller's market and it was a quick turnaround time when bids were coming in, a lot of times veterans, we're not utilizing the VA home loan as an option, and we're trying to self-finance or find other ways.
For that reason, right?
Correct,
Because yeah,
correct. And even,
That's what we saw.
run a CVSO office in a smaller rural county in southern Minnesota, and even talking to some of the realtors in that area, I mean, they weren't even bringing up the issue of VA home loans with those veterans when they were talking with them, just because of the way the market was and it was so non-competitive to
Yeah.
the private side.
So have you taken a view on this legislation, or if you haven't, I'd like to have you kind of submit for the record taking a look at S4208?
Yeah, NACVSO would be glad to take a look at that and look at it for our support.
Great, good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
VFW to NACVSO and to ACE for being here. In my memory, I don't ever remember NACVSO being in front of this committee or ACE. And so I just want to thank you guys for being here. And if you have, and I've forgotten about it, shame on me, okay? I think both panels gave us valuable insight as we move forward with these bills. So the record will be kept open for a week. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.